Hello and welcome back everyone, we Weeb Online, and today I'm gonna continue the story What If Naruto Mastered to Edit Seals Part 4. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
2 weeks ago, his training completely ruined Training Ground 13. It wasn't anything. Training Ground 13 had been turned into a field of holes and craters, with no plants and the occasional dead animal strewn about. Here, on Training Ground 9, there was no longer any ground. Mountains made of rock and dirt rose high into the air, and the canyons where they started to form were slowly being filled with the broken pieces of what used to be a forest. Trees that were decades old were now just splinters, and each leaf was shredded into a fine dust. Huge chains beat on everything around them, making the man-made mountains smaller and smaller until they were strong enough to stop the great toad boss Gamabunta. Not a thing was left, and yet he did not stop. He kept going day after day, hour after hour, with only a few sweet sleepless hours in between. He couldn't do anything else. If he stopped, he'd think, and if he thought, he'd remember. He could not take this pain. With a crack, his chain fell from the sky and easily cut through a mountain of twine. He didn't have to deal with the world around him as long as he could train, as long as he could push himself to the limit and stay there. Still, the words kept playing over and over in his head, even as doubt wrapped around his heart. You don't deserve me in your life. You don't deserve anyone. He wanted to tell her she was wrong and let everyone know that he was good enough. But he might not have been. Could the thief and murderer really say that he deserved to have people in his miserable life? What had he done to make people want to hang out with him? Not a single thing. Maybe that's why everyone abandoned him. His mother, his sister, Tatsuki, Maito, all gone, and no one knows why. Did you really think it was because he didn't deserve them? Were the divines putting these people in his life in the hopes that he would earn the right to keep them, only to be disappointed every time and take them back? What cruel gods then must they be to let him first taste the reward he could never earn? Each side of the mountain he had split, he snapped a chain that was thicker than he was. It looked like two striking snakes. They broke through with an explosion of earth that sent rocks flying and made it rain dirt on this place, which had become a wasteland. Even though these chains were so strong and powerful, he couldn't enjoy it. What good could this power do for him? He had lost the people closest to him and didn't have any family. He had chosen the path of a shinobi and the world of shadows, but what good did it do him? The big chains broke into 1,000 smaller chains each, which swirled around their maker in a blue glow. He did not need power. Power couldn't help him, though. He had to get in charge. About his bonds, about his life, about him. The chains rubbed against each other and moved around each other like snakes trying to mate. When they were done, she stood in front of him like a blue statue that towered over the land. Tatsuki looked up at him and smiled. So much of her face looked like the real one, which he had stolen from the world. As he looked at what he had made, a single tear ran down his cheek. He watched it fall apart with a sad smile as bits of dissipating chakra fell like stars. The beautiful scene was a good match for her memory. Without him saying anything, more chains appeared around him, ready to follow his orders. Then, he felt a sharp, stabbing pain, as if someone had stuck a dagger into his belly button. It went away quickly, but when he looked down, he couldn't figure out why. It came back as quickly as it had gone, bringing with it a million burning needles that cut deep into his skin. As he fell to the ground gasping for air, but not getting any, another dagger went through his chest. 5 went from the navel to the sternum, and 1 went to the heart. He felt as 2 more fell into his head. Even though he was in a lot of pain, he was able to make out a strange sight. His chains, which were wrapped around him to protect him from his pain, were starting to lose their shine. At first, the darkening happened slowly, but then it went faster and faster, leaving him with dull blue chains that looked more real than anything he had ever made. Before he could think about what had happened, they broke. Before his mind went blank, the last thing he saw was the mask and long purple hair of an ANBU he knew. At least it wasn't a new person. The last few times he met new people, things didn't go well. Hello, my name is Yakashi Kabuto, and it's afternoon. Oh, that's a new person. That was good, new was good, especially here. He had no idea until 2 years ago how much he hated hospitals. Since then, this was the first time he had been stuck inside one. He didn't like it. Even the nurses who tried to be nice and make his stay as comfortable as possible drove him crazy. Everything in this hellish place was white, bright, and cleaned with harsh chemicals. It wasn't right or proper to do that. He shouldn't be here, stuck in a bed and depending on others to meet his most basic needs. It was a sign of weakness and openness. If there was one thing he hated more than anything else, it was being weak. But if nothing else, it made him nervous, and being nervous kept him awake. He might be weak right now, but he wouldn't let anyone cut his throat while he was sleeping. If someone came, he would try his hardest to fight back. He'd fail horribly, but when his attacker finally beat him, he'd look right into their eyes as he died. He was not the type to give up. But this new person looked way too young to be here. Kabuto, why are you here? His words were short and sharp. He didn't want to waste time with small talk. The nice things were to be saved for when they were needed. Here, in bed and almost unable to move, he didn't need niceties, he needed to get better. Best of all, in his own apartment. Oh, yes, I'm sorry, I forgot that even though you're a civilian right now, you're more like a shinobi. I'll try not to waste your time by talking around the issue. Naruto showed his thanks with a small nod. Okay, let's get started. Do you remember the last time we talked? Had they met before? Now that he said it, he knew the young man in front of him, but why? I'm afraid not, even though you seem to know a lot about it. That's not surprising, since I wasn't someone you would have taken the time to remember at the time. When your mother brought you to the doctor 2 years ago, I was the one who checked you out. I don't usually do things like that, but we were short-staffed that day and the hospital didn't want your mother to have to wait. Understandable. Kushina, his mother, had never been a patient person, and when she was bored, she would often do things that were bad. That was not the kind of person you wanted to be waiting in the hospital by themselves. She could get into a lot of trouble, and the damage she could do would be huge. Yes, quite. Kabuto stopped for a moment to push his glasses back up to the bridge of his nose and look quickly at the files he was holding. Now, as I was saying, because I was the last person to look at you, they thought it would be best for me to look at you again before we make a decision about your condition. As he put the papers on a chair and his hands lit up with green chakra, he gave Naruto a light sign. You don't mind, do you? I couldn't stop you even if I tried. Do what you have to. Kabuto gave a quick nod in response and then used a diagnostic jutsu to check the young Uzumaki's body from head to toe. During the exam, the doctor frowned at 8 points. These were the same spots that had hurt him during his training. It made perfect sense. After rubbing his hands over Naruto's chest for a few more minutes, Kabuto sighed and shook his head to turn off the technique. So, he began. The good news is that I know what caused this, but the bad news is that I was more right than I thought 2 years ago. Naruto gave him a curious look, which made him tell him more. 2 years ago, I told you about a worry I had about how your chakra coils were getting bigger. You and your sister are the first kids a Jinchuriki has ever had. But now your sister is a Jinchuriki. Because you were born while the Kyuubi's chakra was around, I was afraid that your coils might be affected. Kabuto fixed his glasses once more. When I told your mother this, she was worried, as she should have been. I told her to see a real doctor because I was still learning at the time. But I don't know if she ever did. From what I've seen, I have to think that she did not, though. Even if I couldn't tell anything was wrong with your chakra network at that point, they probably could have. Naruto chose to talk at that time. So you're saying that my network is giving me trouble? He asked. Kabuto gave a nod. Yes, it seems that your conception and the amount of time you spent with your mother and sister as a child led to your body becoming dependent on the Kyuubi's chakra. I don't know why it took so long to show. But if you don't mind my asking, didn't your mother and sister leave 2 years ago? The symptoms should have been clear right away. It's hard to understand why you're reacting so late. The Kyuubi's chakra was still there, but they were gone. Oh, Kabuto's eyebrows went up. What do you mean? The seal is on my arm. I don't know what it's for, but when I tried to get into the Uzumaki compound, stored chakra from the Nine Tails attacked me. Some of it was still inside the seal, so it's no longer there. No, the chakra is no longer there. Kabuto frowned as he looked over his papers one last time. He then made a quick note and nodded. Okay, I'll tell the doctors so we can start treating chakra withdrawal. You should be able to move around in a few weeks, but I don't think you'll be ready to train for at least another month. You are in Uzumaki, though, so maybe you'll surprise us. How much will this treatment set me back? Kabuto actually began laughing. Take a look at it this way, the young doctor said with a grin. You're damn lucky that we can take right from the accounts of your clan. He was mostly back on his feet in about a week. He was told not to do it because it hurt, but he couldn't stand being stuck in bed. Even though he wasn't fully out of the hospital yet, he was allowed to leave the grounds to go to a nearby park. So, there he was, taking one hobbled step at a time over well-trodden paths under a green canopy. There was no doubt that the park was beautiful, and it showed how close Konohagakure no Sato was to the forests around it. The ground was covered with thick grass and flowers of every color, and birds were singing happily in the trees. The warmth of the sun and the buzzing of the bugs made you feel sleepy and calm, which made you want to take a nap in the middle of the morning. He had come out here to do something because he was tired of sleeping. As he walked along the path, he saw something strange. A single man sat with pride at an old stone table. He was very old, probably about the same age as the Sandame, and had a lot of bandages on him. When Naruto saw a cane propped up on the table, he quickly looked down at his own, but doing so made him think of the bandages he had wrapped tightly around his right arm to hide his seal. He couldn't help but wonder how alike they must look right now. He moved slowly toward the man because he was curious about who he was. He could see more as he got closer to the table, though. On the table was a game board with a lot of different pieces on it. Worse, though, were the two white masks that peered out from behind nearby trees, almost certainly to let him know they were there. Back then, this old man was definitely someone. Whether they were ANBU or private security, the average person did not get their help. He kept going, even though he could see that the man's eyes slowly opened and watched his every move like a hawk. Naruto asked the man as he stood next to the table, "Do you have to wait for someone?" After thinking for a minute or two, the man answered, "An opponent." He told him about the game he was about to play. "Oh, I see. Who might be your rival?" "Whoever is sitting next to me." Naruto thought about that for a while and then decided that he had nothing to lose. He sat down next to the man and put his cane against the table. It was hard to tell, but the man almost seemed amused. "You shouldn't be so quick to make enemies, kid." He helped. "At least I know where the enemy is before I get there. Better that than to act like I don't have any. And you have enemies. Everyone has enemies, even if they don't know it. Conflict is part of being human. There will always be someone to fight." The man agreed with you. "Well spoken. For someone so young, you seem to understand a lot about how the world works. I'm slowly getting better because of my mistakes. With each one, I become a little more aware of the real world I live in." Naruto agreed. "Then they haven't killed you yet, which is lucky. The world isn't always so kind. Sometimes death is better, but I'm lucky it hasn't yet tempted me." The man just looked at him for a while before he finally spoke. "You are a fascinating person. Then, I wonder how you would feel if I did this." He reached over and picked up one of Naruto's pieces and threw it away. "Your point was shot down." He gave a reason. "What do you do now?" Naruto took a coin out of his purse and put it on the ground. He said, "It's easy. I change it." "Why should you use a coin? Surely a small rock would have been enough. With a pebble, you can't buy a man's life." The man on the other side of him smiled. A week and a half later, he went back to training. Once easy to make chains now had trouble staying together for more than a few minutes at a time, and their once bright blue glow had turned into an oily black. Every time he made a link, pain shot through his body. His chakra system was as weak as a child's who hadn't been trained. But he didn't know nothing. He knew what he had to do and how to do it, but his chakra was not letting him do it. It was incredibly frustrating, but it was also nice to have a change. He could work on it again, but this time with a lot more knowledge than when he first learned it. So let it hurt him to make them, and let them go away quickly after they are made. He would soon be able to use them better than ever before. All it would take is time, which Uzumaki Naruto had a lot of. Under each arm, a clump of black wispy chakra formed 4 chains that twisted together to look like arms and legs. Both of his new parts didn't have hands or fingers, but they were close enough for now. His left arm grew out of his body, and all of the chains that made up his new limbs moved with it. He shook his head and frowned. Even though he had to move his body to direct them, it was bad enough that he couldn't control 2 separate sets of 4. That was really bad. And it wasn't even controlling 2 sets, it was only controlling one while the other did nothing. Naruto had a lot of time, but he might not have enough to do this. It might be better for you to start with chakra exercises instead of going straight into controlling your chains. As he turned to face the person who had spoken, the chains broke. He hadn't seen that face before, but he knew that hair. "Aw, cat, I wasn't aware that you were there. I never got a chance to thank you for taking me to the hospital, but I'm grateful." She told him to go away. "Don't worry about it. We in the ANBU like you, and the news that a civilian destroyed Training Ground 9 brought you a small crowd. If I didn't do it, someone else would have." She added it almost as a last-minute thought. "Please call me Yugao, I'm not working." "No matter what, Yugao-san, I thank you. If you want to thank me, stop trying to get yourself sent to the hospital again. After going through chakra withdrawal, this is not how you should train. And what do you think we should do?" "Like I said, chakra exercises. You do know them, right?" He said no by shaking his head. "I'm sorry, but I've never heard of anything like that." That made her stop for a moment. Had he really done what he did with those chakra chains without ever having learned how to do chakra exercises? This kid could grow up to be a chakra monster. On the other hand, he didn't seem very interested in fighting on the front lines. That was too bad, because if he used his chains like he did in Training Ground 9, he could probably make whole armies think twice. It wasn't too surprising that they were all killed off, because each child's future was terrifying. "Well, then, you might as well start calling me Yugao-sensei, since I'm going to teach you." Even though he'd rather train alone, he couldn't pass up the chance to learn something from an ANBU. "Okay, Yugao-sensei, Where do we begin? He wondered if this was going to be something that would happen again and again. Another mystery item, wrapped in brown paper like the last one, was on his table. The last package he got was almost a box shape, but this one was long and thin. He opened this one with just as much care as the last, and when he did, he saw a black handle come out of a black leather sheath. The seal of Oni no Kuni, which was proudly carved into the sheath, stood out as the strangest thing at first glance. From what he had heard in Uruka's classes, he knew that Oni no Kuni wasn't known for its weapons and had them all made in Tetsu no Kuni. So, why did he get a blade from that place? When he took his new blade out of its sheath, it was the same black metal as the handle. In fact, the whole thing was made from one piece. The blade was just over a foot long and had only one side. The side that wasn't sharpened stayed the same from the tip to the handle, but the blade moved out a bit as it went up and curved back near the tip. Except for a small silver edge, nothing else on the weapon reflected light. When he took it out of the paper it was wrapped in, he found a note. It said, Emry's Tooth. It is said that it was made in Tetsu no Kuni with the blood of the demon Mry. 7 priestesses of Oni no Kuni gave it its name and blessed it by bathing it in a pool of Ayu no Mizu that they had been given when Takagakure was made. It was supposed to be kept in a shrine in Oni no Kuni so that it could be used if Mry ever came back. However, it was stolen and used to kill the 7 priestesses who had decided to take it with them. It took me a long time to get it, almost as long as it took Kusanagi, but my godson should have a good weapon. Wielded well. He had only been holding the blade for a minute when all of a sudden, it seemed much more dangerous. Who would have thought that a simple piece of metal could have such a long history? Still, when you think about where it came from, it wasn't all that simple. But the most important thing was that he finally had a name. Not of his blade, but of theirs, the one who called himself his godfather. Kusanagi, I wonder who the last person was to use the scepter. At least he had somewhere to start. Under his tree, there was a little girl. Now, this wasn't too strange on its own, because many students had eaten lunch under his tree. Most of the time, he was gone by then, but if he wasn't, he didn't care. They had no idea he was even up there. That was pretty sad for future shinobi and Kunoichi, since he didn't even try to hide. Aside from that, this situation was different because she wasn't eating lunch or resting in the shade. Instead, she was crying, and next to his tree. He didn't know what to do next. Did he leave her alone so that she could cry? Did he not talk to her? Did he tell her to stop crying and go somewhere else? How do you deal with girls who cry? Naruto would have been the only girl he knew who cried in front of him, but she never did. He had, however, talked to a woman who was crying. Something like that might work here, and most importantly, did it even make sense to try? What's the point? Why should he do anything? Maybe it would have been better to stay out of it. Then again, said another part of him in a whisper, she is an heir to a clan. In fact, Hyuga Hinata was the one who was crying under his tree. It could lead to trouble in the future, but it also smelled like a chance. Getting along with the Hyuga clan was not something to take lightly. They were the biggest clan in Konoha at the time. If you left out the Uzumaki, who had only 3 people in their family, they were also the richest. They could be a good friend. As he looked down, he spoke up just enough for her to hear him. Is everything okay? She jumped and looked around wildly until her eyes met his. He hung out on his branch and looked down in a way that would have made Dog proud. Well, The poor girl started stuttering and saying nothing at all. Come on, let them say it. Are you okay? It looks like that was the wrong thing to say, because she fell to the ground and started crying again while tightly hugging her legs. Naruto gave a deep sigh. He wasn't very good with people. He jumped down and got on his knees next to her. She jerked when he put his hand on her back, but she soon calmed down when he rubbed the same soothing circles on her back that he had done with Mikoto. She didn't have to wait long before she clung to him and cried. He thought, yeah, and shook his head. It's just like dealing with Mikoto, she said. SHH, be quiet now. He kept making her feel better for another 5 minutes, until she stopped crying. Alright, feeling better. She didn't say much, just nodded into his shirt because she was too shy to look him in the eye. Good. Now, what's wrong? It took her a minute to get the words out. They gave me a brand. Branded. Like cows. Who did? Her parents. Was that some kind of punishment for the Hyuga clan? You'll have to explain that to me, because I don't get it. Slowly, she reached for the white cloth tied around her head and took it off to show him a big green cross. Lines with hooks came from both sides and met in the middle. It didn't look good at all across the forehead, maybe across the back or over the chest, but not on the face. One thing was clear, though, this brand was definitely a seal of some kind. It shows that we are part of the branch. My father named me Hanabi Heiress. Well, that didn't work out so well with the Hyuga. At the same time, it made his blood boil to see his family act like that. Main and branch. Okay, that was fine with him. but to mark the people in the branch like cattle. That was way too much. The worst part was that he didn't even know what the seal was for. If it was something bad, he might end up making the Hyuga clan his enemies if he didn't know what it was. What else does it do? He asked. When we die, our bloodline is locked away so it can't be taken. She spoke up. He let out a tiny sigh of relief. Even though it looked silly, the seal did what it was supposed to do. Others may have wondered why the main family didn't wear it. But if Hinata was kicked out of the main family because her sister was named heiress, that meant that the main family was in a direct line from the clan heads, not someone who goes on a lot of dangerous missions. After all, they have a clan to run. The main family also uses it to control branch members. What? Even though he had never studied the art, he knew as an Uzumaki that was a terrible thing. Even though his jaw was tight, he was able to growl. How? She quickly kept going even though his anger scared her. Members of the main family can hurt anyone with the mark by using a special hand seal. So that's your dad and your sister, right? And the older people. Oh, really? How could there be older people? Was there a technical third part of the family that let them be free like the head family even though they should have been marked? Something was really wrong with this clan. But he couldn't do anything about it. He wouldn't do anything for them. But he wished there was a way to get the young girl who had just cried into his shirt out of such a clan. Even though he knew he shouldn't be, he was shocked that a clan like that was allowed to exist. This was the world of the shinobi, which was dark and full of shadows. But at least this girl should be able to see the light. He gently ran the fingers of his right hand over the seal while holding her chin up with his left hand. I wish there was a way I could free you, he stuttered. To his surprise, when he touched the seal with his fingers, it moved like water. As soon as he took them off, everything went back to normal. He tried again with his left hand, but it didn't work. So, did his seal make that happen? When he put his index finger in the middle of her seal, it shook like a mirror in a rough pond. He didn't want it to shake, he just wanted it to go away. So, it just went away. Was that why Maida wouldn't tell him what his seal was? Had she hoped that he would break the seal that kept her locked inside his sister by accident? Hinata's question, "Is everything okay?" must have made him look surprised. He forced a smile at her. "Yeah, things are fine. I took off the seal." He had to show her her reflection in one of his kunai for her to believe him. "Thank you again and again and again." She gave him a strong hug, which he returned in a weak way. He was able to stop her when she finally got up and tried to leave. "Hold on, you can't tell them." He told her so. "I'm sure they'll be upset if they find out." Before she ran away, she tied her white cloth around her head again and gave him a happy wave and a big smile. Naruto shook his head and was left to think about how his seal really worked. Disappointed was too nice of a word. She found him 2 days later in training ground 3. Her eyes were red and she was crying. After calming her down in the same way he did the last time, he was able to find out what had happened. One of the older people was showing Hanabi how to use the seal. She wept. "When they tried it on me and nothing happened, they called my dad, who took the cloth off." She moved her hands to the white band around her head, where a new seal appeared. "They changed my name, and Hanabi had to practice opening the seal for the rest of the afternoon." He was so angry that he couldn't even put it into words. He had never been so angry at anyone or anything before. It was wrong to do something like this to your own family. And as angry as he was, he also felt guilty. Since it was his fault that she had been hurt, he had to make things right. He had thought for a long time about what his seal was for. At first, it would just break other seals, but how would that work? The only way to really get rid of it was to take away the chakra that made it. But that wouldn't make seals move, would it? No, it had to be something else, something much more complicated than he could ever imagine. Now he had a way to figure out what was going on. He took off his glove and unwrapped his hand all the way to the wrist, then put his middle finger and index finger on the seal. Like the last time, the seal shook when he touched it. He didn't want it to go away like he did last time. No, he just didn't want it to work this time. The seal on his arm gave off a faint red glow, and soon the seal on her forehead did the same thing. He knew it had to have worked when both seals stopped moving. It was nothing more than a gut feeling, but Uzumaki Naruto. He went with his gut feelings. She was surrounded, wrapped, and covered by darkness. Losing control of it, the pale green flames that flickered on the cold stone walls and the elegant candelabra in the middle of the table were gone. At this point, there was nothing but darkness and silence. The world he had made for them was now a pile of rubble that was slowly sinking into the murky water that covered the floors. The table used to be the centerpiece of the dining room, where they ate many meals together. Now, it was just a bunch of big, rough pieces of wood covered by a torn red cloth. The stairs that led to a luxurious bedroom and a bathroom fit for a goddess had fallen apart into small piles of rubble on the floor. Once the stairs fell, the doors to her rooms disappeared, leaving her with no way out. She could only do one thing in this horrible prison, and it was the one thing she most wanted not to do. Remember, you don't deserve me in your life. Even now, the words were like vinegar in her ears. You don't deserve anyone. Her stomach twisted and knotted as she heard her own words over and over again. Each one gave her a pain in her chest she had never felt before. She didn't know how to describe the pain that tore at her soul, and she couldn't think of anything similar. She had never had a wound that wasn't physical. She wanted to be able to claim this still, but this pain was nothing compared to what her eyes still saw. Even if she lived another 10,000 years, she would never be able to forget the face of her beloved warden, twisted with hopelessness as she left him. Even though he was mad at her for taking away his first friend, the pain in his eyes when he lost one of the few people close to him would haunt her every time she opened her eyes. It was still better than dreaming. While she was awake, things were easy, memories came back to her. She thought about getting back to him, and a deep emptiness burned in her chest. But when she fell asleep, everything changed. She didn't have to deal with memories anymore. Instead, she had to deal with possibilities. None of them ended well. Every time she closed her eyes, her horrors came back to her in vivid detail. From him being the one to leave her behind to his sneers and violent reactions when she tried to get back into his life. She was tortured in her dreams, but nothing hurt as much as seeing his face as he looked down on her, perfectly calm. He wasn't happy to see her or mad about what she had done. Instead, he looked down at her as if she were just another person. He had no memories, no recognition in his eyes, and didn't even try to talk. She would cower before that look, the one he gave to everyone he didn't know well, and those beautiful purple eyes would make her feel like nothing. It was fitting, because she was exactly that, trembling in the dark and unable to see him. Nothing. She buried her face in her hands and cried for the loss of her warden as feelings she didn't understand pulled her into deep pools of misery. In the dark of her prison, there would be nothing that could make her feel better. That piece of paper had been sitting there for almost 2 years, and it was still staring at her from across the room. Its blank space full of accusation. Even though it was just paper and didn't have a mind, she was sure it was judging her every second she didn't write on it. It was supposed to be a letter, and yet here it sat, unwritten. But what was there to write about? She had returned to Konoha at Kushina's request, but she hadn't seen the woman's son yet. He was the only reason she was here and not gambling while playing Hai no Kuni, but he didn't bother to show up. But the boy had never met her and probably didn't even know she was supposed to look at his chakra coils to make sure they hadn't been damaged by the Kyubai's chakra and wouldn't be in the future. Hiruzen had not been very helpful in finding him either. Yes, she understood that the boy might want his privacy, but he could have at least sent him here. She was Tsunade of the Sannin, for Chris' sakes. Who wouldn't want to meet her, even if it was just to stare in amazement at how big her rack was? Wasn't he just starting to get older? He should have been attracted to it like a moth to a flame. So, he probably wasn't a moth. That or she wasn't. No, she wasn't even going to finish thinking that. Even though she had a lot of life experience, she still looked great. She wasn't going to let anyone, including herself, convince her otherwise. He was probably scared off by how beautiful she was. Putting those thoughts aside, her apprentice had been acting strangely lately. She used to spend her time around the compound reading or going for walks in one of Konoha's many parks, but now she spent almost all of her free time training. Tsunade couldn't remember when Shizun's last training session was. When asked about it, her apprentice just said something about removing the rust, which left the Sannin puzzled. The girl probably didn't think she'd be going on missions anytime soon, did she? If Tsunade was stuck in Konoha looking for the elusive red-furred ghost, you could bet that her apprentice was also here. Still, she might benefit from doing 1 or 2 missions. Let her get some fresh air, meet new teammates, and change her surroundings. Trees were nice, but they got boring pretty quickly. When they were done in Konoha, they could take a vacation and go to a beach or something. It definitely sounded nice. Tsunade left the room after taking one last look at the paper that was still sitting on her desk, untouched. She wanted to get away from the paper's critical look. Kushina was anxiously waiting for news about her son, but for now, the paper would stay the same. Covered as quickly as she had for Naruto, those eyes still haunted him. They were pools of ethereal purple that shone brightly in the darkness of that stormy afternoon. Shadows clung to that figure like the arms of lovers pleading with him to come back to bed, but his arm was left unclaimed by the grasp of Night's daughters, burning a fiery red as if it were trying to catch fire. Whoever it was, he knew. By the gods, he had to have known. There was no other possibility. The fact that he was there was a dead giveaway, but those eyes belonged to only one person in Konoha, Uzumaki Naruto. Why was he at her funeral? What could have made the young man watch as the woman he had beaten up in revenge was put to rest? Was it guilt, respect, or something Inoichi couldn't see? He looked at his hands, which were carefully holding the bottle. All the clan leaders knew this wine. The Yamanaka had a strange feeling about the fact that the boy had not only gotten his hands on it, but also spent it all on a dead woman. Something didn't seem to be right, but he didn't have time to try to figure out what it was. Even now, his clan was furious and demanding the Uzumaki prince's head. For them, it was a message and a threat. They didn't know why the young man was mad at him, but they knew that the body had been brought to him. Enough happened. It was also a bad idea. If someone tried to hurt the boy, they would probably end up like Tatsuki and have a big hole ripped through them. He knew from past experience that if he tried to use family tricks, they would probably backfire because they would be stuck in his mind forever. And from a political point of view, Inoichi shuddered at the thought. Attacking him would be terrible. There were rumors that the daimyo of Hai no Kuni himself liked the Uzumaki clan. As the clan's prince, Naruto could probably turn a lot of the Yamanaka clan's allies against them. Inoichi would rather not take a chance on that. And there was still something that made the man uncomfortable. If Naruto was so angry that he wanted to kill, why would he go after a clan member who had left the Shinobi clan? Was he trying to avoid backlash by saying that even though they were related, they were not part of his clan? But those eyes were so full of hate. Did he still harbor a grudge? Was he mad that she died? Did the boy think that Inoichi was somehow to blame for her death? It sounded crazy, but since Inoichi worked with the mind, the boy could have felt that way, and it frightened him. If his anger made him do things that only made him more angry, where would this cycle end? Even though he was only a kid, he had already shown that he was dangerous. Dangerous and hard to plan for a clan that took pride in being able to figure out what their opponents were thinking. Being unpredictable was every Yamanaka's worst fear. He did not want this boy to join his clan's enemies. His clan didn't seem to think the same way. Inoichi could only hope that no one would be so stupid as to make the prince mad. It was too early for another funeral. He had just finished burying his sister, as her daughter slept peacefully next to her. The only thing that broke the silence was her daughter's soft breathing. Kushina wouldn't find such rest. She sat up in the hotel bed she shared with her daughter and looked out the window at the town they were staying in at night. The red sheets on her lap matched the color of her hair, and her bare torso was exposed to the cool air coming in through the barely open window. Every day, her thoughts were filled with equal parts worry and hope, keeping her on edge as she waited. The days turned into weeks, and then into months. 2 years had gone by. There was a problem. Either her letter to Kurenai got lost or her former student wouldn't answer her question about her son. Every day that her letter went unanswered, her daughter's claims that the two didn't get along seemed more likely. Hiruzen had received a dozen letters, but after he told her to come back from her trip, he did not write her again. She couldn't do that, and he knew why. Couldn't he see that all she wanted to know was how her son was doing while she was away? How was he doing in school? Did he make any friends yet? Meet any women? She couldn't stand being cut off from his life in this way. She needed something, anything, to show him that he was still doing well even though she wasn't there. Then there was Tsunade, who was the one person she needed to hear from the most. It was hard enough to get the woman to go back to Konoha to check on her son's health, but when Kushina heard that the Kyuubi's chakra could hurt her son irreparably, she made sure to get the best. All that was left to do was wait. Tsunade would show up in the end. She believed the woman, even though she didn't say anything about her son. Either the Sannin would tell her that the young medic was wrong and that she could go back, or he would tell her that the medic was right and that his coils were broken. If he was wrong, the trip would end right away, and she would go back to Konoha. If he was right, she would have to wait until Tsunade fixed any damage. Her son's coils were strong enough to resist the Kyuubi's chakra, or he reached chakra maturity and his coils were done forming. If his coils were done, his Uzumaki healing could make up for any damage the Kyuubi's chakra could do. But if the coils were damaged before his chakra network was mature, his healing factor would work against any attempts to fix the damage to his chakra network. No matter what happened, she wouldn't know until someone sent her a message she was desperate to hear. She was sick with worry, but she couldn't do anything. Just have to wait. She got out of bed with ease and moved to a chair by the window. This night, like so many others, she wouldn't be able to fall asleep. And it would for a lot of other people too. Again, he found something under his tree. This time, it had a cute little bow on it. 2 Chains carefully took the small box and opened it with 2 more. Inside was a roll with frosting on it and a small note with only a picture. Chibai Hinata gave him a smile. Hinata smiled and waved when he looked out the window of the classroom. She was very strange. She was still as shy and quiet as she had always been, but she seemed to talk to him as often as she could. almost like she didn't have anybody else. The more he thought about it, the more he thought it was true. It made him sad, but it also showed him that he wasn't the only one who had problems in this world. Still, there were people whose pain made everything he had ever been through and heard about seem like paradise. No one had time to moan about their own problems, which didn't help. No, you just had to keep going, taking one step forward after another and never looking back. Because if you looked back, you stumbled and fell deep into a sea of misery and despair that you couldn't get out of. To hesitate was to die. To stagnate was to die. Uzumaki Naruto did not plan on dying anytime soon. He had been hurt, but it wouldn't be the last time. He just had to pay more attention. He couldn't help but think about how he felt when he first met Mito as he watched Hinata take her seat. Now that he had freed this lamb from its clan's dead pasture, wasn't it his job to watch over it? He gave a small laugh. People had called him a wolf before, so why was he so worried about this lamb? Was it because he found himself alone once again? Was he so desperate to have someone, anyone, near him that he would let such a shy creature stay with him? She wasn't his company, she was his job. Even though the seal was there, her clan probably noticed that it didn't work. Or, he just thought it worked the way he had planned. Hinata seemed too happy for it not to work, though. But this was a village of shinobi, and Dog once said, look underneath the underneath. You would have to make sure she was okay and wasn't forced to act this way so as not to raise suspicions. In a shinobi village, though, not doing anything to raise suspicion was itself suspicious. That's how things went. But if they had noticed that the seal didn't work even though it was there, he would be responsible for anything bad that happened to her because of that. If she got hurt because of something he did, he would be to blame. If she were kicked out of the clan, it would be up to him to take her in. She was now his responsibility, his duty, his lamb. He would make sure she was okay. Even though he wanted to trust her and whoever gave him this gift, he couldn't because he didn't have Mito's chakra to help him heal faster. He couldn't risk eating food that he hadn't made himself. Maybe he could enjoy something like this someday, when he knew how to check for poisons or get rid of them. But until then, he couldn't take such a gift. Naruto put it in a hole in the tree's trunk so that any animal could find it. Then he went back to the classroom. Iruka was getting ready to start his talk. She was angry, but it was hard to tell because she was hiding behind her books and her long blonde hair. Every time she saw the girl, she talked to him about something. Didn't she know who he was and what he'd done? This wasn't someone you tried to be friends with. This was someone you took to prison or, better yet, the headman's block. Not only did this jerk kill her aunt, but he also dragged her dead body to her father. Her dad had told her mother and her that he had gone into the boy's mind on the Hokage's orders, which made it clear to her why he had done such a horrible thing. It was a message, a warning, a threat, and a way to get even. She wasn't going to let it go, and most of her clan agreed with her. So it made her sick that this girl liked him and wanted to be close to him. It had to stop right away, and if no one else did it, it was up to her. That thing didn't deserve to have any connections or people in its life. The girl had to be taken away for her own good. As soon as Naruto got out of class for lunch, he went to the roof. The rent was coming due soon, so he had to get the last of it. He wanted to make a quick trip to the training grounds, but he had to change his plans when he saw Yamanaka Ino walking quickly toward Hinata. He carefully watched from the edge of the roof, where he was crouched down. Hinata was halfway to his tree when the blonde caught up to her, grabbed her shoulder, and threw her to the ground. Naruto was ready and tense. Behind him, a few chains swung around dangerously, ready to be used. Ino. The lamb bleated as she tried to pull herself up. The blonde laughed at her. Hyuga, where do you think you are going? She barfed. I'm going to hang out with a friend. No, you are going to see a monster, she said. Not he's an evil person. The shy girl spoke up. Naruto was a little surprised that she stood up for someone, and even more surprised that she did it for him. On the other hand, if their lives were switched, he would probably do the same thing. She had found someone who didn't treat her like her clan, so he was probably pretty important to the young girl. On the other hand, Ino didn't seem to be as shocked. You have no idea what he's done, right? He's a monster, and I won't let him dig his claws into you anymore. That was sufficient. He didn't want her to tell the others, and it was wrong for her to think she could come and make Hinata do what she said. He had already stopped her clan from being able to control her, so what made Yamanaka think she could? It was a put down. He had taken care of Hinata's safety by going against the biggest clan still in Konoha. A mindwalker wasn't going to undo his work. In an instant, one of his chains moved quickly forward and stopped growing, sending out a short length of chains that broke apart. The Yamanaka heiress's face was covered in black mist. He hadn't been able to keep them together after he took them apart, so they wouldn't move more than a few feet before they broke. Even if he had shot at the young blonde, she wouldn't have been hurt. But neither she nor any of the other students watching knew that. What? The girl yelled in anger and shock. It didn't take long for her eyes to find his hunched body on the roof, and her classmates soon followed. Many people quickly ran away. Today, he wore the gifts from his godfather with pride. His hunched body was covered by a fur cloak, and chains swayed behind him like a demon's tails. Purple eyes looked down coldly from a pale face, and his red hair only made the difference stand out more. Shinobi might find this to be a strange sight. It was scary for a group of students at the academy. Usually, you couldn't see Emrai's tooth, which was in the small of his back. But the way he held the blade now made him look at it. More than a few people were afraid of the classmate they didn't see very often. He wasn't the same as them, he was different. If what Ino said was true, then he was a monster. Despite her tendency to gossip, right now it seemed she very well may have been right. Enough already, Yamanaka. He did not speak as a child. It was like hearing the voices of their parents come out of his mouth. One day, they might find out that the person in front of them was not a student but a shinobi. He was a child, but he was still a shinobi. Even though he had a long way to go before he could be called a real shinobi, he was far better than them. Naruto jumped off the roof of the academy and landed in a crouch next to Hinata. Helping her up, he rose to a stand, looking down at the shorter heiress before him. If anything, her anger seemed to grow when he was there. She snarled, "You." He said yes, putting down his sword and putting his arms across his chest. "What the heck are you doing here? You don't belong among people. And you have no right to tell Hinata who she can hang out with and who she can't," he said. Before turning back to the angry blonde, he gave the girl next to him a quick glance. "I'll look out for her." So the Uzumaki make an alliance with the Hyuga. Hinata is safe with me, and the clans are still the same as they have always been. This has nothing to do with them. When you kill a Yamanaka, it bothers them. He looked sad. He hadn't meant for everyone in Konoha to know about this, but kids talk, and parents talk even more. This would probably be known to everyone in the village by the end of the week. That's wrong. Hinata was quick to his defense. He smashed it right away. "It is." He said yes, ignoring the shocked gasp of the young Hyuga. "He's a monster. He probably enjoyed every damn second of it too." Ino was blamed. Naruto's eyes hardened. "Don't talk so lightly about things you don't know much about. What happened that day is a secret between Tatsuki, me, and your dad. You think I don't know that you killed my aunt to get back at my father? You think the whole Yamanaka clan doesn't know that?" Naruto was momentarily surprised. Tatsuki was the sister of the clan leader. He didn't know that. Things got a lot harder because of that. But Ino took his surprise as a sign that he hadn't thought anyone would know why he had torn up her aunt. "That's right, we all know, and now everyone here knows it too. Even though she left the clan, she was still blood, so you won't get away with it." Naruto didn't let her accusation make him angry, and he stopped himself from saying, "I already have." Instead, he answered calmly, as if these details didn't matter. "Nevertheless, Yamanaka, Hinata is under my protection. You won't bother her. If she's safe with you, then she's against the Yamanaka clan as a whole." Naruto cocked his head. That was a lot of big talk. He had to wonder if she knew what she was talking about. Leaving aside the part about himself, she was almost saying that the Hyuga were the Yamanaka's enemies. Especially in Konoha, that was a very stupid thing to do. She probably didn't mean it that way, which is why it's so important to be careful with what you say. Instead, he thought about what that meant for him. "Then your clan says I'm an enemy." No, not yet," she said. She admitted. "So you're saying I'm an enemy of the Yamanaka?" Ino froze. Her father had been teaching her the basics of clan law, and she knew that she had every right to call him an enemy of the clan. However, that meant that the Uzumaki clan as a whole was in danger. Even though many of her clan members would be happy if she did that, she knew it would be a bad idea to do anything like that without first talking to her father. "No, you say that the people I protect are your enemies, but you can't call me an enemy." He barfed on the floor. She insults him first by trying to control Hinata, and now she insults him again by not following through on what she said. Uzumaki Naruto was a proud young man. He did not take insults lightly. "Fine, I'll do it myself if you're too scared." He looked around the group and saw that there were several clan heirs there. It wasn't perfect, but it would suffice. He started by looking straight into the Yamanaka heiress's eyes and saying, "I am Uzumaki Naruto. If you are a member of the Uzumaki clan, give up the Uzumaki name." No one paid attention to the many gasps. "I, Naruto of Hai no Kuni, swear in front of these Yamanaka heirs and the people of Konohagakure that Yamanaka Ino, the Yamanaka heiress, will be my enemy for as long as I have a grudge against her. Just as I say I'm an enemy of the heiress, I also say I'm an enemy of the Yamanaka. This is said by my word, and this is done by my will." He left with one piece of advice and a spin on his heel. You should tell your clan, Yamanaka, so I don't meet them before you. He left after that. As her best friend Sakura came up to her, Ino knew for sure that she had just done something stupid. Her dad was planning to kill her, unless Naruto got there first. He tried not to notice that the man across the table was looking at him with a stern, disapproving look. When the man didn't do anything to keep the game going, he was forced to look him in the eye. That was a bad idea. So stupid it's unbelievable. Naruto felt ashamed and hung his head. Yeah, he said, even though his pride was hurting. It was. Then, what was it that made you make such a rash decision? My pride, Naruto said. I did what I did because I was proud and didn't stop to think about it. The man on the other side of him gave a rough grunt. Indeed. But you said, think fully. We both know what you didn't think of. What was it you did? The pride of my clan. This was my problem, and these were the things I did. I didn't want the clan to be linked to them. Then at least be glad you thought of that much. Had you not renounced your clan, you would still have resources and political sway, but you would have dragged its name through the mud over a petty squabble. She might have died, and you might have been to blame, but it happened, and now we have to move on. Regret is a waste of time. He gave a nod. And the dead have no reason to be proud. Keep this in mind. I will, but I don't think I'll be able to be humble. His statement was answered by a laugh. I didn't think you would, but you just need to watch where that pride of yours takes you. It's fine to be proud, and it's fine to be very proud. But it's not okay for a shinobi to lose control. Use your pride to hold yourself back if you have to. I get it, and I appreciate the advice, Danzu-sama. Danzu just smiled. The streets were rather crowded today, far more so than they usual were. Even though there were a lot of people, he had no trouble getting through the sea of flesh. After his game with Danzu was over, the man told him to be seen in Konoha as a last bit of advice. He had just said that he was against the Yamanaka, so hiding would make him look like a coward. While it was good to remain in the shadows, it was equally important to back up your words. No promises were broken, no threats were made for no reason, and every word was spoken with full confidence. Anything less would damage your reputation, and reputation was rather important when it came to influence and dealing with the clans. Naruto was definitely dealing with the clans. He would need all the reputation and power he could get, especially since he had given up his Uzumaki name. Confident enough people had seen him for now, he ducked quickly into the sanctuary of a local shop for a break from the masses of people. Every inch of the walls was covered with paintings, and even more were kept safe in stacks of frames. It was pretty clear that whoever did these things didn't do them just to make money. Anything that was sold was probably used to make more. Any craftsman or artist would have to be admired for doing that. Naruto let his eyes move over the many paintings, each of which was a sea of color. He lost himself in the store for almost an hour, looking at everything. But when someone came out from behind the counter, his amethyst eyes were drawn to a single piece of art on the wall. It wasn't easy to do, but it was easy to make. The blank canvas turned into a mouth, and from behind white teeth came out a gray tongue. The thing that caught his attention was what was on the tongue. Even though the design was strange, it was clear that it was a seal of some kind. Even though his arm didn't move like it would with a seal like Hinata's, it did feel like the image was pulling it. He asked the pale boy behind the counter, who was watching him with interest and couldn't be much older than himself. Are you an artist? The boy nodded. I do. My name is Sai. It's nice to meet you. The smile was so obviously fake that it was hard to believe. The eyes were squinting under a short head of black hair. Then tell me, Sai, where did you find this seal? The change happened right away. Naruto wasn't expecting to see someone his age with such serious eyes. I called the boy. Within 5 seconds, a young woman with skin as pale as Sai's came out of a room behind the counter. Her long black hair was falling down her back, and she had a frown on her face that showed she wasn't interested. He told her, watch the counter. This man was interested in the root of silence, so I'm going to show him our special selection. As the boy's eyes had done, so did hers as she carefully looked him over. She didn't say anything as Sai pointed Naruto toward the stairs. Naruto was brought to a small, empty room after the pale young man. As soon as he shut the door behind him, Sai lunged at him with a tanto, which he had to block. His chains wrapped around the blade when it made it within a foot, and Sai was quick to surrender it to put some space between the two of them. Considering how far Naruto's chains could reach, that was probably not a good idea. But neither was sticking around. He grabbed the tanto and threw it back to Sai's feet. The boy carefully got it, keeping his eyes on Naruto's chains the whole time. I suppose I wasn't supposed to ask about the seal then. There are only 2 types of people who know about it. Considering I don't know you, it means you must be a new root agent. Root? I haven't heard of it, and I don't want to. What I want to hear about, however, is that seal and where I can find it. And why would you want to know that? Naruto shrugged. Curiosity. I know it's a seal, but that's about all I know about them. I have no idea what it might be capable of. I'd like to. Sai stuck out his tongue, showing the same image that had been painted. Oh, Naruto quirked a brow. Now that's interesting. How does it work? It keeps us silent. A grin found its way to Naruto's face. He was certainly glad he had entered this store. I'm sure there's more to it than that, but you couldn't tell me if you wanted to, could you? Sai shook his head in the negative. And if I could let you? The young man looked suspicious by narrowing his eyes. You said you didn't know anything about seals. I don't. Naruto took off his glove quickly and unwrapped his arm up to the elbow. But with that, he made a fist and showed Sai the seal that covered his right arm. I have no use for it. He had been wanting to try this on another seal ever since he had changed Hinata's, and this was probably the best opportunity he could get. There was a seal, and there were also secrets. Few things were more valuable than secrets in the shinobi world. These secrets were far more valuable than he could have ever hoped. When his finger touched the seal's pink flesh, the seal wiggled and glowed. Naruto could only imagine how painful it must have been to first put the seal on such sensitive skin. As the glow faded and he pulled his hand back, Sai looked at him with a puzzled expression. It's completed. Naruto said this, which made the other boy astonished. What? Don't believe me. Try saying something you've never said before. I don't know what else the seal does, but I think you should be able to talk now. We'll change everything else later. Sai agreed, giving Naruto a suspicious look. Taking a deep breath, he spoke hesitantly. As Shimura Danzu has been working with Orochimaru. The dark circles around his eyes got bigger as the words came out of his mouth easily. You did it, he muttered. You actually broke his seal. Sai stared at Naruto in amazement, as if he were a legendary shinobi from long ago who had come back from the dead. I told you I would be able to. As sure as he sounded, Naruto was glad that it had worked the way he wanted it to, which meant that he had, in the most basic sense, figured out how this seal worked. To think that he had the power to change seals however he wanted. It was actually pretty scary. Seals could do anything they knew how to do, so how much did his seal know and how did it know it? He'd have to see what he could do later by pushing himself to the limit. And the other parts, you can change those too, right? If you tell me what they are, I can do it. I haven't decided if I will or not. Sai nodded to show his agreement. Yes, absolutely. You still don't know a thing about me or about us. When Naruto's eyebrows went up, he had to stop. Oh, you don't even know how many bears are on that seal, do you? Come on, let's go someplace more comfortable where we can talk about this. After you. Naruto pointed to the door and stepped back. He didn't seem to have forgotten that the young man he was in the same room with had recently tried to kill him. As Sai moved into the girl's field of vision, he heard her voice. It's about time you came back. How long does it take to send out a single? She stopped when she saw him follow the boy down the final few steps. Why you didn't kill him? She whispered in disbelief, and her calm frown loosened to show that she was shocked. Before he answered, Sai took a quick look around the shop to make sure no one was there who could hear what he was about to say. Shimura Danzu has been talking to Orochimaru and helping him build Otogakure. Her response was a quick intake of breath. It looks like a very valuable ally walked into our small shop today, was the pale boy's way of explaining what had happened. There are a lot of things to talk about, so we'll be in the main room. Make sure no one else enters. She nodded, and Naruto once again found himself following Sai into unfamiliar territory. Just in case, his hand rested on Emrai's tooth. Behind the counter, there was a small room that was empty except for a table with 2 chairs and a small bookcase with a small potted plant on top. Sai didn't stop here, though. Instead, he moved toward what Naruto assumed was a storage closet. Unlike the shop entrance in the room upstairs, this door slid open to reveal a room full of unmarked boxes. Without pausing, the boxes were moved aside, just like the door had been a few minutes earlier. When he looked down at the floor of the closet, he saw tracks, and when he looked back up, Sai gave him a small smile that looked much more real than his earlier attempts to smile. There was a third hinged door at the back of the closet, and the boy was quick to lead him down the stairs it led to as he closed the doors and put the boxes back where they belonged. Waiting for Sai to finish and pass, Naruto fell into step behind him, still not ready to show the boy his back after what happened upstairs. The pale young man seemed to understand and didn't say anything about it as they went down into a large sitting room. There were tables all over, some covered in books and others in maps. On one wall was a simple place to cook, and on the other wall was a big board covered with slips of paper. A coffee table was in the middle of the room, surrounded by 4 couches. Sai pointed to one of the soft blue couches and went to make drinks for the 2 of them. Naturally, Naruto had to decline. You said you needed to know the seal's full purpose to change it, right? Naruto stopped him by holding up a hand. Yes, but first I need to know exactly who I'm dealing with. You mentioned a man named Shimura Danzu. I know someone whose name is Danzu. Tell me about the Danzu you know. Shimura Danzu was a teammate and rival of our Sandaime Hokage, Sarutobi Hiruzen. He is the leader of Root, a private army that does the village's dirty work whether the village likes it or not. I see. He wouldn't happen to have a bandaged right arm and be blind, would he? At the description, Sai stiffened. Yes, he looks like that. You must have met him at that time. I have. Naruto nodded. You say that his private army is called Root. Can you tell me more about them? They are the shadows that protect the great tree in Konoha. Each one is trained and conditioned to serve without question, and they only answer to Danzu himself. They have no feelings or thoughts that don't relate to the mission. When compared to the average shinobi working for Konoha, they are far better because they were trained like ANBU from the age of 6 onwards. In a way, they are like Hiruzen's ANBU for Danzu and serve a similar purpose. Earlier, you said you didn't know me, and that must have made me root. What do you and your compatriots have against the organization? Sai looked down at the coffee table for a moment to gather his thoughts. They stole everything from us. Our families, our identities, and our very lives. And when they realized that some of us weren't useful to them, they threw us away. Naruto's eyebrows rose dramatically. From how he was talking, it sounded like Sai was one of those rude operatives. This had the potential to be a very good thing for him. A group of biter warriors trained for most of their lives before being thrown out. They had seals that they didn't seem to like and that he could easily remove. Naruto had thought about getting a pack, but this might be the best time to make one. It was hard for him to stop the happy smile that was about to form on his lips. It wasn't time for that yet. He could celebrate his win later, when it was sure. For now, he had more to learn about the people who were so mean to the shadows that watched over the big tree. Since Sai hadn't said anything else, it was up to Naruto to keep going. From the way you talk about it, am I to assume that you were once a part of Root? The pale boy agreed. Yes, I was, and so were the rest of us. We trained for years, doing everything we could to improve our skills, but it didn't help. Emotional conditioning is the last step in the training process, and we failed. No matter how hard they tried, we could not fully let go of the emotions that made us human. Because of this, we were considered failures and kicked out of the program. He wasn't worried about you betraying him. The seal was the first thing we were given. It keeps us from saying anything that could hurt the group or Danzu, and it also keeps us from disobeying any of his orders. His seal is so complicated. He had help. Orochimaru of the Sannin is not known for his sealing knowledge, but his genius makes up for what he does not know. He used to compete with Namikaze Minato, who is known as one of the best seal masters in recent history. Orochimaru probably picked up some of it just from hanging out with our Yondaime Hokage. Even so, I can't help but wonder how it works to prevent you from disobeying someone. You can't see. Naruto nodded. The seal on my arm says nothing. I just think about what I want, and it changes the seal to match. He looked down at his sleeved arm. I don't even know what it's called or who put it on me. Someone at least as skilled with seals as the Yondaime would have had to make something that advanced. But I'm not sure that even his knowledge would have been enough to make something like that. It is, however, a very powerful gift, and both you and I should be thankful for it. Naruto's lips parted in a small smile. Of course, the boy was still focused on changing his seal, because who would want to be tied to someone they hated? Well spoken. So, if the seal makes you loyal, why would he throw you out? For Konoha's benefit, Sai grudgingly agreed. We don't fit in with Root because of how our emotions affect how we think during missions, but we are all trained as shinobi despite being civilians. In the event of an invasion or other similar crisis, we would be able to help protect civilians who are leaving and help Konoha's forces. Naruto's respect for the old man grew a lot after hearing that. Others may have thrown away failures, but the fact that you found such a good use for them was impressive. They didn't seem too happy about it, based on what Sai said. But they had to admit it was probably the best way for Danzu to use the shinobi he had trained. A good idea, but you do not seem happy about it. And we're not. We were trained for more than just protecting civilians in case of an emergency. Some of us have done a good job of reintegrating into society, but many of us have not. We shouldn't be hiding and waiting here, we should be doing something. Covert operations, delivering sensitive information, tipping the balance between groups, anything would help at this point. Anything. Something about the way he said it made Sai stop for a moment. After a moment, he looked into Naruto's eyes and gave a nod. Anything. We can't go on like this. Does that mean you'll let me change your seals from Danzu to myself? Sai couldn't believe what he saw. He can't use you anymore, but I can. If you need a reason to do something so badly, you can serve me as you would serve him. I need a moment, if you don't mind. Sai stopped halfway to the stairs and turned back to the man who had given him the closest thing he would ever get to the purpose he was made for. Do you mind if I talk about what you offered to Mai? I'm in the same situation as she is. With a casual flick of his wrist, Naruto told him to leave. Do what you want, my offer is for everyone. I'll be happy whether it turns out to be 1 or 100. Even though Naruto didn't see it, Sai gave him a quick nod before he began to climb. It was not long before he came back. Sai stood still next to the couch where Naruto was sitting and quickly dropped to his knees. I can't speak for the others yet, but if you save us from him, you can do whatever you want with us. Naruto didn't even try to stop the big grin that took over his face. Then from this day on, you are mine. Even taking slow, deep breaths didn't help him calm down. Crossing his arms over his chest, he looked down at his seed, who was fidgeting as she stood in front of his angry eyes. You did what? He hissed through clenched teeth and tried with all his strength not to yell. She said, and not me. It was him. He said that I and our clan were his enemies. The way he was looking told her that he didn't believe her for a second. Oh, is that so? A growl came from him. So you're saying he just decided on a whim to make our clan his enemy? He killed Aunt Tatsuki. We don't know that, and we don't know anything about what happened. He stopped before he had a chance to lose control. Gods, did he really bring up a kid who couldn't stop and think? Even though they were Yamanaka, the mind was everything to them. Even if he did, continued Inoichi. Even if we think it was because of what I did to him, he hasn't done anything else to hurt us. We had, for all intents and purposes, a ceasefire, even if it was a neutrality that made people suspicious. Now, that's broken, and my old child did it. He gave a sad head shake. I had hoped to stop this from happening by keeping the others from going against him, but it looks like I should have been focusing on you. I didn't mean to turn him against me. She said this, feeling embarrassed to be standing in front of her father and admitting that she had made mistakes. I wasn't even trying to communicate with him. Inoichi took a short break. The last thing he said was explain. I'd seen that Hinata had been talking to him. Her father took a sharp breath when she mentioned the former Hyuga heiress. Oh, merciful gods, he prayed hard that she hadn't also dragged the Hyuga clan into this mess. Uzumaki was bad enough, but the Hyuga would crush them without even trying, giving them no chance to apologize. I couldn't stand it if someone tried to be nice to that monster, she said after her father yelled at her for calling the boy a monster. So I tried to get her to stay away from him at lunch. And that wasn't what he wanted, he said. She got a shiver when she thought about how he had crouched on the roof of the academy and watched her like a predator waiting to pounce on its prey. He said that she was under his protection and that I should leave her alone. Inoichi's fists tightened. He had no doubt figured out where this was all going. I asked him if the Uzumaki had joined the Hyuga, and he said that the clans had nothing to do with it. She stopped, afraid to tell her father what was coming next. You brought her back up, didn't you? I did. Ino just nodded, never looking at her father. He got mad and told me to stop talking about things I didn't know about. He said that the problem was between you, your aunt, and him. Inoichi nodded. It was true, and he wished more people in his clan could see it. If he wasn't always trying to stop them from doing something stupid, he might have time to talk to the boy and figure out what's going on. Or he would have if his daughter hadn't gotten the young man to start this fight between clans. Yes, it is, keep going. Then he said it had nothing to do with what we were talking about. Hinata was safe with him, and that was final. She thought about what she said the whole way home, trying to convince her father that it wasn't as bad as it seemed. By the time she got home, she realized that it was even worse than she had thought. She took a deep breath and continued. I said that she was an enemy of the Yamanaka if he was protecting her. I was hoping he would stop. Inoichi gave a snort. The last time he talked to the Sandaime, he found out that Naruto was a proud boy, even when he had nothing to be proud of. He told her that was stupid and shameful. As a Yamanaka, you should have known he was a proud creature. Trying to scare him into backing off by threatening someone he said he was protecting would only make him more determined. Not only that, but you also threatened a Hyuga. If they wanted to get back at you, they would have sided with him quickly. I know, I didn't choose the right words. He asked if the clan had told him he was an enemy. What did you say back? I told him that he wasn't doing that yet. He asked if I thought of him as an enemy. When I thought about what you had taught me about clan law, I stopped. I knew I had to talk to you first about something like this, but he didn't like that I was taking my time. She admitted. I think it was rude of me not to be able to answer. Well, at least she wasn't completely hopeless as a Yamanaka. Someone as prideful as Naruto would indeed be insulted by such, as he should have been. It meant you didn't have the strength to back up your words and that you hadn't taken things seriously enough to know what was going on before you opened your mouth. I would be insulted too. I take it this was the moment he declared us his enemy. His daughter nodded. At least the Hyuga aren't involved. It's bad enough that the Uzumaki are our enemy. This was her chance to get away, but she knew she had to tell him everything or he might try to solve the problem without all the information. Tusan. Yes, Ino. His voice conveyed the weariness he felt at the moment. She thought that this might help. The Uzumaki are not our enemies, Naruto is. He nodded. It doesn't matter, as in Uzumaki. Any feud he has is with his clan. Well, that's just it. Before he called us enemies, he gave up his clan name. It made matters worse. Inoichi tensed immediately, going completely stiff. Are you sure that's exactly what he did? His face had turned pale, and his hands were shaking. Why, yes, Daddy. Inoichi sat down and looked out into the distance for a few moments before looking at her. Then he can do whatever he wants. Even a day later, he couldn't stop the small smile on his lips. Even though he doesn't have many yet, it's a start. No longer was he relying upon the name of his clan or the political influence they held, but rather he had started to create his own. Yes, he was a small fish struggling in shallow water and drawing unwanted attention to himself, but he would become one of the big sharks that lived in the dark of Konoha's political sea. Why stop at Konoha? Sai had given him approximate numbers, and with that many he may be able to start expanding far sooner than he had thought possible. Of course, it would also mean expanding far too soon. Before his tower could start reaching for the sky, he would have to build a solid base. Mai was tending to the shop today as Sai notified as many ex-agents as he could find. He couldn't do much with just the two of them, but that would change over time. He'd just have to be patient. From his usual perch, Naruto could see Hinata through the windows. She moved seats and sat by the window closest to him so she could always see the Yamanaka heiress. Even though the blonde may have looked in Hinata's direction a few times, she did not move toward her and showed no signs of being hostile. Her father probably told her it was a bad idea to go after a Hyuga because the results could have been disastrous for her clan. When his teacher got up from his desk to start the day's lessons, he turned to look at him. He was only slightly surprised when the classroom door opened and someone else came in. The black hair looked familiar, but the defeated way the person was standing was not. It took Naruto a moment to figure out who he was. Uchiha, Sasuke, so it looks like another Uchiha made it through. Curious, he had to wonder how much the boy actually knew. More importantly, he had to wonder, what might your relationship to Mikoto be? Naruto, she called as she walked into the place where they usually train. The young man was quick to cease his practice with his chakra chains and make his way over to her. Yes, Yugao-sensei. She had to admit that she liked how that sounded. If she was happy with her job at a NBU, she might be able to manage a team before she retired. She hadn't yet become an ANBU captain, though, so if she lived that long, that was still a long way off. She was a Kunoichi, after all. She had a much shorter life expectancy than a civilian woman. I have heard of your recent issues with the Yamanaka clan. I trust I do not need to tell you how foolish that was. You do not, Yugao-sensei. I know what I did wrong. She gave a sharp nod. Good. Now, we've been focusing on improving your abilities with chakra chains through the use of various chakra exercises, but I think it prudent to teach you some more skills that you can put to use immediately now that you have enemies within the village. Of course, what's the first thing we'll do? I've noticed that you have a knife. Am I right in thinking you haven't had any formal training with it? Yes, that's right. I just got it recently. Makes sense. Can I see it? Without saying a word, he took the sword out of its scabbard and gave it to her hand, which was waiting. She looked at it for a moment with a puzzled look on her face before giving it back. That's an interesting blade. What's its name? Anyone who cared for a blade named it if the blacksmith hadn't already. Some names didn't make sense and were just given out of love or because they sounded cool, but others could tell a lot about the blade or the person who made it with such care. This, he smiled fondly down at his gift, is Morio's tooth. M-tooth. Morio's. Like the dragon's tooth. It wasn't as famous as the Kusanagi, but it was a well-known blade. How did he even get his hands on something like that? There were people who would give anything for such an infamous blade. It was sure to attract attention in the future. The very same. He answered yes. How on earth did you manage to get it? That, sensei, he laughed, is something that nobody knows. It had been a long time since his old opponent had looked so happy. He could have made it longer instead. Sarutobi Hiruzen looked across his desk at the older man sitting on the other side. Of course, if Danzu was old then so was he, and Sarutobi was not old, he was vintage. The old, bandaged shinobi didn't say anything, just grinned at him and waited for the cage to speak first. Hiruzen eventually gave in, sighing. What is it, Danzu? What has you feeling so damn happy? Well, you probably know I like to sit in the park, don't you? Yes, at the table where we used to play. What's the big deal? I recently met a very strange opponent. He reminds me of myself, actually. At the end, he gave a small chuckle. And please tell me how this affects me, Danzu. I don't care who you play board games with in your free time, though most men our age play with their grandchildren. Oh, I just thought you were fairly close to his family. Still, he recently gave up his clan name, didn't he? Hiruzen froze. No, there was no way he was talking about Naruto. If Danzu had been able to get his claws into the boy, the old cage would have felt a chill go through his body. We couldn't let something like that happen. What are you doing, Danzu? Why are you using Naruto? At this time, Zero. Strangely, Hiruzen didn't want to believe the man. And so you decided to come tell me that why? Naruto can make his own choices, and the two of you can meet. I'm well aware of that. But to think that you would try to hide him from me. Danzu nodded. Shame on you, Hiruzen, he's just like me. You should have gotten to know us. Exactly what I wanted to avoid. One of you is more than enough, I do not need a second. You speak as if I was trying to change him. He was already like me when we first met. You'd have two of us regardless of if we had ever met. I was hoping to put it off long enough to be able to go back to my retirement. Alright, conceded Danzu. Now, Danzu, did you only come here to tell me that you had met Naruto? No, of course not. I came to tell you that you've lost him. Hiruzen looked down on Danzu. And how do you work that out? Because he doesn't trust you anymore. That's not unusual, scoffed Hiruzen. It's been missing for weeks. I may have lost it, but that doesn't mean I can't get it back. Danzu's grin cracked his face. Not when I'm the one he goes to for advice, you can't. Danzu left his office still grinning, which made Hiruzen wonder if the experienced shinobi needed help. He still couldn't blame him. Getting Naruto's trust was hard, especially in modern times. Even though it didn't mean much right now, both he and Danzu knew how important that trust would be in the future. It would be enough to completely change the balance. Hiruzen could only hope it was going in the right direction. He couldn't be more pleased with the boy. Gods above, he hoped not, because it didn't look like this would end anytime soon. He felt like it was just yesterday when he saw the boy kill his first person. But now he was fighting an entire clan by himself. He almost started crying. It would probably also make Yamanaka cry, but for totally different reasons. He'd have to keep a closer eye on the boy now, not because he wanted to help him with his plans, but because he wanted to make sure they were well hidden. He almost got giddy with excitement when he thought about what he might have to hide. Body parts mutilated, fires, kidnappings. Is this sabotage? He might ruin some careers or break up some relationships. He could either find a way to get them kicked out of the elemental courts or get all the other clans to fight against them. Maybe he'd just play harmless tricks, but that wasn't much fun. Oh, the boy could hurt them in so many ways. The options were so deliciously endless. And that was to say nothing about how Kushina would react when she learned that the Yamanaka were the enemies of her son. She'd be mad that he changed his name, but she'd probably also get back at the Yamanaka. This could be so fun that he might not read his Ika Ika as much as he used to. In fact, speaking of Ika Ika, what if he did something like that? Kakashi couldn't help but giggle perversely at the thought. Naruto might be able to marry the Yamanaka heiress or seduce Yamanaka clan members. He might even be able to have a child with Yamanaka blood. Ooh, how sweet a revenge that would prove to be. Then again, Naruto could have done this knowing that Inoichi would try to keep his clan in line and might not really want to do anything. You didn't have to attack someone just because they were your enemy. It wasn't nearly as fun, but it was still right. Still, Kakashi was hoping that wasn't true. The heiress had challenged him. And it wouldn't be fair if all that happened as a result was that the Yamanaka clan and a 10-year-old boy became enemies. If Naruto didn't do anything, he might. Even if Naruto didn't like it, he probably wouldn't find out if Kakashi had done things to make the Mindwalkers nervous and worried. It could be fun, as long as he didn't push it too far. The last thing he wanted was for the clan to attack before he was ready to take them. No, it was probably better to just lay and wait for now. Either Naruto would do something or an opportunity to do something on his behalf would come up. In the end, anyone who was against Naruto was also against Hadake Kakashi. Sai had spent the last 2 weeks rounding up everyone he could find, which made Naruto pretty happy. 22 root failures who were fully trained stood at ease in front of him. Sai stood right behind him in the same position. He had quickly become his right-hand man and second in command. Mai was running the shop above them and making sure they didn't get interrupted. Because of a seal he didn't know much about and because he was trying to avoid the crowds in Konoha's busy market, he now had control over 24 people. It looks like he was starting to have better luck. He hoped this wouldn't be like the other times when things seemed to be going well but then fell apart. The figures in front of them were all dressed in dark black, which the purple eyes quickly took note of. He didn't want them to be there, but there wasn't much else he could do. Since they were all in root training, they all wore the same uniform, and he didn't have the money to change it. He did, however, have enough money to pay for the masks they now wore. 22 fierce wolves growled back at him, their faces stuck in white porcelain forever. He had spent most of his savings on the masks and a good chunk of what Sai and Mai had made from their little shop, but when he looked at his army, he knew it had been worth it. Shizune usually called him Little Thief, but she once told him that people had said he looked like a wolf. She called him Wolf Prince for the rest of that day. She wasn't the only one to say that he acted like a wolf, though. Dog and Yugao sensei had both talked about it and said that most of the ANBU felt the same way. Naruto didn't mind. Being called a wolf was actually a compliment, and now that he had a pack, people would think of him even more as a wolf. He was a wolf, and this was his pack. Together, they were going to be famous. But now wasn't the time for that, not when they were so young and weak. For now, they would stay in the shadows, where it was safe, and grow until they were strong enough to stand in the light and the harsh light of the sun. It could be a few months, or it could be a few years. It didn't matter much, because Naruto had enough patience to see this through to the end. Even if it took him the next 100 years, his pack would be remembered. Depending on what the gods want, he might even be able to write some of it. He hadn't worn something like this in a long time. Rough and dirty brown cloth that was torn and stuck to him like glue. When Mikoto ran away from the village, she was given his original cloak, but no one would have been able to tell the difference. He didn't like this cloak as much as the one his mysterious godfather had sent him, but that one was much too obvious for the job he was doing now. 4 wolves were hiding in the shadows of the overhanging roof behind him. 2 more were closer to the target, and 6 more were waiting up ahead. To be honest, he hadn't put much thought into how to do this. Considering what he was trying to do, he didn't have nearly as much as he should have, but it would have to do. This wasn't even close to being important enough to make him plan so carefully and in detail, but he had to do it. At the very least, this would give him a good idea of how good his wolves are. He wasn't someone who could really tell how good someone was, but he could tell when someone was good. As it was, he didn't know much about their training except that it was supposed to be at the ANBU level. He got a chill when he thought he might have a whole pack of dogs. He was scared and excited at the same time, but he knew that dog wasn't a typical ANBU. No, that man was not at the level of a NBU. He was in a class by himself. He wouldn't be surprised if he saw the man wearing the cage hat someday. He took one last look at his wolves and got ready to move, but he stopped in the middle of his move. He hadn't expected her to be here. He had to think for a moment before he remembered that he had seen his target visit that woman before. He had learned most of his favorite words by listening to the woman talk, so it was strange that he had forgotten them. But the last time he saw her, she didn't seem to remember him either, so maybe it wasn't so strange that he had forgotten. She sat down next to the target, and they were both happy as they talked. This gave Naruto a problem. She was going to make things harder, and he had been trying to stay away from her for both of their sakes. Going after her friend was sure to get him into trouble that he would rather stay away from. He could easily stop everything, and the only thing he would lose is the ability to watch his forces in action. But was that what he wanted? He could always find out how they worked later. This chance was nothing, and other than some good karma, it didn't give him much. He felt bad about admitting it, but he knew he needed karma if he wanted to have any hope that his luck wouldn't change again. After all, this was more for her good than for his. He might find a friend in her, but the chances were not very good. This wasn't the same as what had happened with his wolves, but it was a lot more like what had happened to Hinata. Of course, it was clear that the person he was after had friends, which Hinata desperately needed. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad to just give up and leave her alone. He knew she didn't like it, but he didn't know why. On the other hand, she had friends and a good job, so she wasn't all bad. Since she had lived with it for so long, she was probably able to deal with it just fine. So, did he do something good and maybe make a friend, or did he back out and save himself a lot of trouble? Who was he kidding? Trouble always seemed to find him, so he shouldn't have tried to stay away from it. He turned to the wolves and called one of them closer. "Yes, your majesty." From the sound of her voice alone, she was probably no older than 16. "We're still going with the plan, but there's a problem." He turned his head toward the table where the person he was after was sitting. His young soldier looked at the table for a moment, then turned back to his face and stared at him from behind her mask. "I understand. We'll keep her from interfering." Naruto nodded. "Make sure you do. Remember, don't kill anyone and don't let the people of Konoha see you. If she ends up with you, that's fine, but I'd rather not meet so many people so quickly." She put a fist over her heart from where she was crouched. "On your order, my lord." She went back to her teammates and told them what he had said. The 3 others turned away from her and nodded to show they understood. If that wasn't enough, the other 3 gave him the same salute she did and whispered, "We hear and obey, Naruto-sama." When he was done, he turned his attention back to the 2 women below who were having lunch and waited for the best time to strike. The sun beat down on them for the next hour and a half, and there was a lot going on under their feet, but Naruto and his wolves did not move. Cold wind had blown around them, making the few leaves that were still there dance like puppets in the hands of a master. Even though the sharp difference between the cold air and the hot sun was not pleasant, the two Kunoichi seemed to be fine. After waiting for a long time, a chance came along. They hadn't moved more than a yard from the outdoor table when Naruto jumped off the roof and into the crowd below. He dodged and weaved through the crowd as he focused on the two women who didn't know what was going on. Takeout boxes were stacked on top of each other in his target's arms, and when he ran into her on purpose, they fell to the ground. He didn't say sorry as he turned to face them, and he never slowed down. His makeshift cloak covered the top half of his face, before he turned away and went on his way as if nothing had happened. His careless frown turned into an annoying smirk. He didn't see the woman's angry face or the surprised look on her friend's face, but he did hear her angry cry. "Hey, you little shit, that was my food. Get the hell out of here." He didn't need to look behind him to see that she was chasing after him. The scared looks on the faces of the people in front of him as they ran away told him everything he needed to know. But that didn't mean he didn't look back at her, give her a smug smile, and flip her off anyway. Whether she was angry before or not, she was now. He ran through half of Konoha, using his small size to get through crowds and around obstacles. He always made sure she was close enough to see him. He wouldn't have had to worry about her giving up, because each second he stayed one step ahead of her, she got more and more angry. When she started throwing kunai, they were getting close to the training grounds. Sharp pieces of metal flew by his face at speeds that were a little too fast for him. He was fast enough to throw off her aim, but not fast enough to catch the flying instruments of shabby death, or even have a chance of stopping them. She still had some sense, though, so she didn't use jutsu on someone she didn't know inside Konoha's walls. Even though it was rude, running into someone was not illegal, and they were not forced to make up for it. But it was against the law to use jutsu against regular people. She might have thought he was trained as a shinobi, but she didn't know for sure. She didn't want to take that chance. In that way, he was pretty lucky. As soon as his feet hit the grass of the training ground, he had to dodge another kunai. It was time to act. Mitarashi Anko never saw it coming. She swore to herself that Anko was often too quick to act and had violent tendencies. It wouldn't be good if she just did something without thinking and hurt the boy who ran into them. The council already wanted to get rid of her, so the last thing they needed was for Anko to give them a good reason to do so. Also, something about the boy seemed oddly familiar. Hadn't she heard of a young man in such a cloak running around the big village of Konoha? She couldn't quite remember, and trying to catch up to the two was driving her crazy. She had just reached the end of the tree line that surrounded the training ground when she found a knife to her throat and a hand over her mouth. She knew that a second person was holding a blade against her right side and pushing it with their hand. She could just make out the white mask before the second person pulled her head back by her hair and stopped her from moving. This made it much easier for the first attacker to keep his blade on her neck. When she looked down her nose, she could just barely see the boy in the cloak being chased by Anko. He went straight for the middle of the grounds, even though the forests around it were a better place to lose the Tokibetsu Jounin. Then she realized the boy had no plans to run away from his pursuer. No, he was bringing her here, and Kurenai couldn't tell her best friend that it was dangerous. When the young man raised his arm, it was bent at the elbow, and his fingers were spread out. The boy wasn't alone, and the fact that the two people holding her didn't move at all as he got ready to make a sign showed that there were even more people there than just the two people holding her. She had to wonder if the council had finally gotten tired of trying to do things the right way, and hired a group to get rid of Anko for good. A fist was clenched in the air, and her best friend was suddenly on the ground, pinned by 5 people wearing the same black clothes and porcelain wolf masks. A 6th person, who looked like a guard, stood next to the boy. It looks like they used some pretty good bait. She knew when he took off his hood and showed her a crown of red hair. Naruto, what did he have to do with these people, and why did they want Anko? She would have liked to ask, but judging by the blades they kept near her, her captors didn't seem like the talkative type. Then, 2 more people came out from either side of her, so there must have been 4 people behind her, and they must have been there the whole time to keep her away. They had either failed or didn't care that she could see what they were doing as long as she couldn't stop them. As he knelt in the grass next to her friend, the boy in the middle of the field didn't speak, or at least didn't seem to. He pulled her clothes off almost gently, showing the world the curse symbol that marked her as Orochimaru's abandoned student. Mitarashi Anko didn't dislike anything more than Orochimaru himself, but it was gone with just a touch. "Mitarashi-sama, I will remove your seal. Enjoy life." The voice was soft, but Kurenai could hear it just fine. She couldn't believe what she had seen, but the fact that the seal had been broken was clear. The two people who were holding her arms loosened their grip just a little bit, taking off their blades but still holding on to her arms. "We think you should take her home, because she will be confused here." With that, the 4 around her and the 5 on her best friend went away. Naruto and his guard only stayed until Kurenai got close enough to attack. He turned his amethyst eyes away from her and gave her a look that showed no emotion. The masked man by his side then took him away. When she fell in the same spot Naruto had just been, she checked on him right away to see if he was hurt in any other way. "Is it gone for good?" Anko asked. She was still lying on the ground, but she turned her head to look at her only real friend. Her eyes were wide with surprise and hope. "Yes, it's gone." At that moment, Anko seemed to get rid of a big weight, but her face quickly turned into a frown. "What's the matter?" Kurenai was confused and asked. "She should be happy right now, shouldn't she? How am I supposed to celebrate when that jerk spilled all my dango?" Kurenai couldn't help it. The adrenaline was leaving her body, and her heart was full of relief. She laughed and threw her head back. Anko was not happy. "I want my dango, damn it." It didn't help the man to try to break free from his chains. He wasn't taken by a group of random people. Instead, he was taken by people who had been trained as weapons their whole lives. A not very skilled chunin like him had no chance of getting away from them, especially since he had been working in Konoha's government for the past few years. If he could get out of this, he would go back to training right away. As he pushed against his ropes again, the metal chair he was tied to squeaked, drawing the attention of one of his silent guards. The sight of a growling wolf was enough to make him stop moving. When the door to the other side of the small metal room he was in opened, both guards did the official Konohagakure no Sato salute, which they had learned from the Hai no Kuni. He was surprised to see that it was a young boy coming in. When he found out who it was, his surprise turned to horror. He had heard that Naruto, when he was still Uzumaki Naruto, had said that the Yamanaka heiress and her clan were his enemies, but he didn't really believe it. People talked about going against the boy, but most of what they said was just drunken nonsense. Inoichi, the leader of their clan, quickly stopped anything that wasn't right. That person did everything he could to keep the conflict from getting worse. It was clear that his clan's rival did not think the same way. It didn't look like Yamanaka Kira was going to have a good day. Since he had become an enemy of the Yamanaka, it had been almost a month, and Naruto was pretty sad about it. So far, they had done nothing at all. Nothing against him, nothing to make friends, nothing. That was fine, though. Their heiress had already shown that she wasn't strong when it came to standing up for what she believed in. But Naruto wasn't. Even though he made the choice quickly, he was now at odds with these people. He was going to make them see that, by the gods. And now he had his own forces to help him. As Naruto walked over to the man tied to the only piece of furniture in the room, he couldn't help but smile meanly. He wasn't smart to let the wolf attack first. He sent a letter to the court of Hai no Kuni the day he gave up his name for the first time. But he didn't hear back until today. The court had recognized that he had given up his name, so he didn't have to worry about the Uzumaki name getting mixed up in this. He could do whatever he wanted, and nothing could stop him. Naruto took a kunai that had just been sharpened out of his pouch and went to work. He was startled awake by a scream that threw him out of bed and made him crash down the hallway. Inoichi stopped when he walked into his daughter's room. His daughter turned on the lamp on her nightstand, which made it easy to see what had been done to the wall next to her bed. The wolves stalk around under the shade of the great tree. He didn't even have to wonder if the red writing was real. As a shinobi, he knew exactly what it was as soon as he saw it, and the smell told him for sure. As clear as the blonde hair that hung down the wall and was tied to a kunai that was firmly stuck in the wall. It's likely what made his daughter wake up. Also interesting was the fact that a dog's skull was hanging from what could only be a Yamanaka's hair. If what was written on his daughter's wall was any indication, he was a wolf. He saw that his wife was making his daughter feel better, so he walked over to where the curtains were dancing in the cool night breeze. He had made sure the window was locked when he checked on his sleeping daughter before going to bed. He was afraid that Naruto would do something, and he hoped that this would be enough to stop him. But he didn't know anything about these wolves. When he looked out into the night, he quickly found out. Naruto, who was crouched on a nearby roof and facing him, looked back at him. Two people in wolf masks stood next to the boy on the roof behind him. They were just tall enough to reach the same height as the former Uzumaki. Cold eyes the color of amethyst just looked at him. Your turn. They made him do it. This wasn't just a threat, it was a sign of strength. Naruto could have killed his sworn enemy, the Yamanaka heiress, but he could have also killed the clan head's daughter, Inoichi's daughter, who was also his daughter. The thought made him feel afraid. When he said this, the boy was, if anything, being kind. He made it clear that he didn't like how one of Konoha's clans hadn't done anything. They were a big group of trained family members, and he was or had been a single boy, but they didn't do anything to stop him. He must have thought they didn't think much of him if they didn't care that they were enemies. This was his way of reminding them who they were up against. Nobody would have to tell them again. Inoichi did know that he was a threat, which is why he was trying not to make things worse. It looks like his efforts backfired because he insulted the proud creature on the roof across from him, which made this happen to him. The boy did nothing but point to the gates of the clan compound, where he saw a group of his clanmates shouting in fear. When he turned around, neither the boy nor his wolves were in sight. It would be important to let the clan know, and he would have to think of a way to get out of this mess. Unacceptable. Unfucking acceptable. They thought they could beat his godson, didn't they? The child of Orochimaru's god. What idiots. Quick steps thumped through the halls of his house, passing scared workers and careful soldiers. You two, come with me. Two Odo shinobi fell in line behind their master without arguing but with a lot of fear. They kept going deeper and deeper until Orochimaru found what he was looking for. The snake Sannin made his way to the far wall of a room where all the clans of Konoha were being studied. There, failed experiments were being kept in special tubes. As he got closer, their twisted, bloated bodies wailed in pain. Their minds were almost gone because of the cruel experiments he had done on them to try to figure out how the Yamanaka used their minds. Even though the skin was tough and clear, it didn't hide what was inside. The veins were filled with a thick, black liquid that the Sannin knew burned like 1,000 suns as it moved through the body. He had never used them before, but now he does. Orochimaru turned to the Odo shinobi behind him. Both of them were staring at what was being shown to them with open horror. When they worked for him, they had seen a lot, but nothing like this. The pale man gave his orders by pointing to the deformed Yamanaka bodies that were still clear to see were Yamanaka. Bring them all to Konoha and put them all around the Yamanaka home. I want some to be nailed to the walls, some to be stuck on spikes in public places, and some to be in people's beds when they wake up. Tell them that their loved ones are back and that if they think they can beat the godson of Orochimaru of the Sannin, they will meet the same fate. Why yes, Orochimaru-sama. Orochimaru was about to leave, but he stopped and turned around to look over his shoulder. He told them to cut a few of them open and put explosive notes inside. I don't want them to forget what it means to cross my Crimson Prince, she said. As she followed her best friend around, Kurenai sighed. Well, followed wasn't very good. As they looked for the elusive purple-eyed wolf, the Tokibetsu Jounin wouldn't let go of her hand, so it was more like as she was dragged around. 2 weeks after she got out of Orochimaru's Ten-no-Juin, she thought she should probably meet the boy and thank him. She said something about how it was the right thing to do, but Anko was never right, as her clothes showed. But for whatever reason the woman wanted to thank the boy so much, which could have been because this was important to her, she brought Kurenai along. In other words, but the Genjutsu mistress had been looking for him for almost 2 years. What made Anko think she would find him in just one afternoon? Hey, Kakashi. Anko beckoned a dog-masked ANBU to come down and join them. The ANBU did so in a lazy way. I'm working, Mitarashi. You can't tell everyone my name in that way. The woman just gave a careless shrug. Do you know Naruto? I do. He didn't say anything else. Where does he live then? Even though Kurenai was wearing a mask, he could see Kakashi's brow raise in question. And why do you need to know something like that? Anko didn't answer right away. Instead, she proudly pulled her shirt away from her neck to show her smooth skin. I owe the brat a thank you note for getting rid of it for me. When Anko called the boy a brat, only Kurenai heard him growl. I'll take you to his apartment if you treat him with the respect he deserves as someone who could have done that. Kakashi knew where he lived, right? Kurenai almost hit herself in the face. He did, of course. Even though he had always kept his distance, he liked his sensei's children. She really should have asked him at the start of all this trouble, but there was no guarantee he would have told her where Naruto was. Fine, let's go finish this up. Even though the woman tried to make it sound like this was the last thing she wanted to do, you could hear the excitement in her voice. Kakashi grabbed their shoulders and shrugged. A moment later, they were in front of a simple house. Have fun, you two. I don't do anything I wouldn't do. Kakashi paused. Except little boys, I suppose. If you really want to show your appreciation, I might not do them. But he stopped talking and gave a shrug. He ran away before the kunai Kurenai threw at him could hit him. Damn pervert. The woman with red eyes said something and shook her head. When they knocked softly on the door, they were surprised when a young girl with long black hair opened it a moment later. She also seemed surprised to see someone at the door. Naruto. There are 2 women here to see you, the girl called back into the apartment. She quickly looked over Anko and then said, and I think one of them is a hooker. Kurenai had to stop the angry woman from going after the girl, who couldn't have been more than 12 years old. Okay, I'll see you tomorrow. The answer was hard to hear, but the girl seemed to get it, because she slipped out the door and started walking down the street. Go in, he'll be with you in a minute. She called back, but she didn't look. Before she could catch up to her friend, Kurenai pushed her into the home of her sensei's son. She was surprised by how simple and clean it was. There was a kitchen area with a small table for four, a coffee table, a couch, and a bookcase. She didn't see any decorations, stains on the walls, dirty dishes in the sink, or anything else that would make her think a 10-year-old boy lived there. It looked like he had just moved in. Fuming as soon as Naruto walked in from what Kurenai had to assume was a bedroom, Anko felt better. What was Naruto doing with that girl in his room? Kurenai's face got red as she thought about what Kakashi's words meant. As Anko slammed into the boy and squeezed him tight to her chest, a purple missile cut off her inappropriate thoughts. Thank you again and again and again. She didn't know that Hinata had said the same thing to her last month when he helped her. No problem. He managed to grunt, his face almost as red as his hair as he was pressed into Anko's big bust. Anko looked down at him with a frown for a moment before breaking into an even bigger smile. You're the boy Inoichi was asking questions about, right? I am, and you're a little early for that dinner. I still have 2 years until I finish school. Anko laughed out loud. I was almost going to forget about it. Kurenai looked at her like he didn't understand, and Anko grabbed her right away. What are you? Nothing, nothing at all. Naruto shook his head and looked at a clock that was close by. It's a little early for dinner. Would you two like some tea? Why not? Why not? Anko sat down at the table right away. Kurenai turned to Naruto with a sigh as she watched her friend act silly. That would be great, Naruto, she said. He looked like he was thinking for a moment before he made a confused frown. Sorry, but I don't think we've met before. He went up to her and put his hand out. Hi, I'm Naruto from Konoha. It's a pleasure to meet you. His closeness felt like a warm blanket on a cold night, giving her a sense of security that made her feel very vulnerable. Kurenai put her hand in his, even though her instincts told her not to trust this strange person in front of her. This young man who didn't make her skin crawl but instead sent pleasant shivers down her spine. She knew what he was doing. He was willing to start over as if they had never met before and give her another chance. There was no way for her to show the gods how thankful she was for the chance. You be Kurenai, and it's all my pleasure. As he brushed his hand against his lips, she felt her heart beat faster and her cheeks turn red. If you say so. Kurenai was sure that if things had gone on for any longer, she would have made a fool of herself. As it was, her instincts were all over the place, and she didn't want to push him away after he had given her a chance to be in his life. Lucky for her, Anko was here, and Anko was Anko. Are we going to have some tea, or are you both going to get a cup of coffee? Naruto laughed, then let go of Kurenai's hand and went into the kitchen. You're right, Anko, I'll get started right away. As the three of them sat around his table, talking quietly about whatever came to Anko's mind and drinking hot tea. Neither of the women noticed the chakra chains wrapped around Naruto's sleeves or the wolves hiding in the corners, ready to cut the two of them down as soon as Naruto gave the signal. If they're lucky, they'll never find out. As he went into a dirty bar at night, he was hidden by the darkness, which made it hard to tell who he was. He went to the back room and was let in without saying anything. The man with the wolf's face shut the door behind him and went back to keeping watch. There was only one table and 2 chairs in the room. One person in a wolf mask stood in each corner, and the boy across the table from him had one on each side. He had come by himself because he wanted to fix this mess, but his clan's worst enemy didn't have much faith in this meeting being peaceful. Naruto. He said hello to the head of the Yamanaka and met that purple gaze, which was way too cold for such a young boy. Then again, a boy that young shouldn't be able to use a small army. Naruto wasn't just a kid, he was a very, very dangerous young man, and Inoichi couldn't believe that this was what the son of Kushina had become. If he had met the boy before his mother left, he might have been able to guess that this would happen. Naruto had a brighter future than most kids could even imagine. Yamanaka. Inoichi felt pain, not even by his given name, just like he was another member of the clan. He sat down, crossed his fingers, and let out a sigh. Look, let's skip all the nonsense and get to the point. Naruto's eyebrows went up, but he didn't say anything. My family really screwed up when they tried to beat you. Even if they don't know it, I do. I thought that the first threat would be enough to stop you, at least for a while, but then you sent the bodies. Bodies? Naruto looked like he was really confused. Yamanaka's bodies turned up again, but they were cut up and proudly displayed all over the compound. Some of them were full of notes they could blow up. The former Uzumaki had a worried look on his face. The only body was that of Yamanaka Kira, whose hair I shaved off and into whose flesh I cut the head of a wolf. My wolves broke his limbs, and we cut off his fingernails and toenails before taking enough of his blood to write on the wall of your heiress. So far, that's all we've done. You don't know who might have done this. No, I think of something. I just didn't know that they would come to my aid so quickly without calling me. Then you have a friend. Yes, something like that. Inoichi frowned but kept quiet. Naruto would have been quick to take credit for it if he had done it. I see, but that's not the point. I see that things are getting dangerous. The clan thinks you did it, even if you didn't. Some are scared and smart enough to see how stupid it was to challenge someone who has nothing to lose, but others are just using this as a reason to act. You've shown me how serious you are about this by making it harder for me to keep my clan members in line. Inoichi let out a big sigh. My clan knows that it was my daughter who made things so bad, and they love her for it. They want to get back at Tatsuki, and they think that Ino has given them the perfect chance. The Yamanaka head saw that Naruto jerked when he said the name of his sister. I know you won't give up, and neither will my clan. I don't want there to be any fighting, but my clan needs to know when to give up. What do you want to do? If you promise not to kill each other, I'll step back and let Ino run the clan for the rest of this fight. Naruto stared at him, his face showing that he couldn't believe what he was seeing. She may have been able to keep the clan going when there were no enemies, but what if there were? Your clan will go down in flames. If this keeps up, it's likely that the clan won't make it to the next Hokage. Naruto nodded. You make a good point, but I can't believe you'd let this happen. If having to start over from scratch is what it takes for my clan to learn, then so be it. You have a lot more going for you than we do right now, and we have no real way to fight back. If I let them try, at least they'll know why I wanted to stop them from doing this. The redhead thought about this for a moment and then sighed and nodded. I'll go along with it, Inoichi. Even if I had wanted to, I didn't want to hurt this great forest. Then I'll fight them from the shadows and make them kneel down. Just make sure you are ready to go back and get your clan. After a firm shake of hands, Inoichi turned to leave. But Naruto's soft voice stopped him from going all the way out the door. She was my very first friend. I had no intention of hurting her. Inoichi closed his eyes and nodded when he heard about his sister. I already thought that, but thank you. You've made me feel better. You're a good man, Inoichi. I can't wait until I finish school and can call you my comrade. As Inoichi left, he smiled. We are all friends because we all live under the big tree. He stuttered, even when we're yelling at each other. She was up to her knees in dirty water as she waded through what she thought was a sewer. With only 2 years left, her mother decided it was time for her to finally learn how to control the power that was locked inside her. Now, if she could just find that stupid fox, she'd punch it right in the nose and demand that it give her its power. The plan could not fail. When she saw a big cage door that didn't belong there, she ran quickly toward it, splashing loudly through the brown water. When no fox came to greet her, it made her wonder why. Her mom told her not to get too close, but she couldn't even find it. Getting a little closer so she could see wouldn't hurt, right? Even though she was sure of herself more than her Uzumaki blood, she walked all the way up to the cage and still couldn't see the fox. She looked both ways as she climbed over the gate, as if she was afraid her mother might be watching. The inside didn't match the outside at all. The outside looked empty and normal, but inside, it was a war zone. The area was full of huge piles of rubble. The murky water she had to swim through to get here made them look like islands. There were pieces of wood all over, and every once in a while she could see bits of metal shining in the dark. As she kept walking, she eventually heard crying. She ran as fast as she could toward the sound, throwing caution to the wind because she was finally interested in something. She didn't find anything at all like what she thought she would. A woman who looked a lot like Uzumaki Mido was lying on her back on a pile of rubble while small waves of murky water lapped at her torn dress. Her skin was as white as the moon and stuck tightly to a body that was almost dying. Behind her, her hair was tangled, dirty, and as orange as a sunset. When the woman heard her coming, she jerked her head up and her red, puffy eyes shot towards her. And Naruto. The woman cried helplessly, as if she really needed her brother. But I thought this was the Kyuubi. How did she know she was his sister? No, I'm his sister, Naruto. Before she knew it, the fox with 9 tails was holding on to her like a lifeline. Please, asking the fox, please, for the love of God, take me to him. You've got to take me back to him. Why? I'll do anything. Just do anything to get me to him. Naruto didn't know why the fox was so desperate for her brother, but she had heard what the woman said. The young Uzumaki's smile turned almost evil. When her mother found out, she was going to be pretty shocked. Anything.
I will continue the story in next part. Till then, we weeb offline.